One of the things that I know we've talked about and I've mentioned before is my penchant and my desire for being right. However, there's a caveat with that, because one of the things I hate more than anything in the whole world is being right and knowing that I'm right, but then I'm wrong as well. Which I know sounds confusing, but it frustrates me to no end. Because here's how I can be right, but wrong at the same time. Let's say that there's something that I'm talking about, and I know that I'm right. And it's not just that I know I'm right. I have verifiable, objective, quantitative evidence and proof proving my point. Like, I have all of the examples to show just how right I am. I think a lot of this comes from the fact that I had to write like a whole bunch of papers in college and in seminary and do all sorts of research. Because what they tell you when you're writing a research paper is you can make any claim you want, but you have to back it up with good scholarly facts and knowledge. There's a reason we don't cite Wikipedia when we're writing a research paper. You have to find scholarly articles that people have worked on very hard. And that's your evidence. That's your proof. And once you have that, you can make whatever claim you have so long as you have proof. And when you have that proof, that undeniable proof, and there's no possible way that you are wrong whatsoever, what happens? See, that's when you become wrong. That's when you can become wrong, I should say. Because even if you're right and you know you're right and you have the evidence to back you up, what you do with being right can make you wrong. You see, one of my favorite things I've ever seen is this comic of this guy hunched over the computer typing. He's got a furrowed brows and he's typing furiously. And his wife is behind him. He says, "Honey, come to bed." "Oh, I can't. Somebody's wrong on the internet and I got to let them know." Because we have this need to not only be right, but to prove that we're right. But when we try to prove that we're right, sometimes we wind up just being wrong. You see, we teach our kids and we learn the lesson of being a gracious loser and a good winner. And those are lessons that we're supposed to learn as kids. And it's really easy to be a gracious loser. To say, "I was wrong, I lost, you win." It's easier to do that than to not gloat and be proud and boastful when you win. We need to address an elephant in the room. To each and every one of us right now, we're here because we have one shared assumption. We're right. And not only do we assume that we're right, we know that we're right in the depths of our heart. And what I mean by that is we have given our lives and we have dedicated all that we are to Jesus Christ. We believe that when Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, the light, no one comes to the Father except through me," we believe that. And we stake our lives on that claim. And what we do is we use the Bible to go through and show how right we are. Like, the Bible exists as our evidence to how we're right and why we believe what we believe. And that's fine. That's good. We understand the need for Jesus. We understand what Jesus talks about and all of these things, and we know in the depths of our soul that we're right. But what do we do with being right? How do we live our lives knowing that we're right? Because again, there's something to be said for being right and being wrong at the same time. Our gospel text kind of helps us understand how all of this got started. See, our gospel text in Mark this morning, it has Jesus teaching on the Sabbath. And his teaching astounds people, and it's noted that Jesus is teaching as one with authority, not like the scribes, but he's teaching with authority. So the question becomes, where is it that this authority comes from? It's because everyone listening to him, everyone seeing Jesus, they know who Jesus is. They know he's some guy from Nazareth. They know he's the son of Joseph, who's a carpenter. So it does not make sense that he's teaching as one with authority. What gives him the right to stand up there and tell people all of these things? How is it he can teach with this authority? He didn't go to school. He didn't spend years in the temple training. He didn't spend years of reading. No, he grew up the son of a carpenter. So why is it that he is teaching with authority? We know because he can. And what happens next shows everybody the authority that Jesus has. See, as he's teaching, a person comes in with an unclean spirit. This person looks at Jesus and essentially tries to call Jesus out. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? See, I know who you are, the unclean spirit says. You're Jesus of Nazareth. Why would an unclean spirit know that to begin with? It's kind of strange. You would think that the unclean spirit would be wherever unclean spirits come from, hanging out, knowing all of the things that they know. How is it that this unclean spirit recognizes Jesus by looking at him? Because it says he just came in there. It's not like he had any foreknowledge of who Jesus was, right? But for some reason, he knows who Jesus is. But he continues, have you come to destroy us? Now, hold on here. How is it that the carpenter's son from Nazareth, why would the unclean spirit be afraid that it would destroy himself? Why would the spirit be afraid that Jesus could destroy him? Another strange question that we should be asking when we read this text. However, the answer lies in the very next thing this spirit says. He says, I know who you are, the Holy One of God. And right there, it is very fascinating. You see, we understand and we know the forces of good, the forces of evil, forces of heaven, the forces of hell. They're in this constant struggle, this tug of war, battle for superiority. So it would make sense then that both sides would know key players of the other side, right? Like, we understand that. And this demon recognizes Jesus, knows who he is, knows he has the power to destroy him, but knows he is the Holy One from God. Do you understand what is subtly happening here? Cosmological forces are at work, and they are showing the power, the glory, and the majesty that Jesus Christ has. So he tells the demon to kindly shut up and to get out. I mean, he puts it nicer because he's Jesus and he always says things nicer. But he casts the demon out of this man, and everyone is looking at him, and they are just dumbfounded by what they just witnessed. Because they came to the same conclusion we have to, that this guy is ridiculously powerful. And that the only logical way that he would be able to do that is if he was sent by God and given power to God. Therein answers the question on whose authority does Jesus speak? Jesus does not speak for his own sake. Jesus is empowered by God to speak the truth, to show us the true nature of all things, and to combat the forces of darkness. The authority that Jesus has comes from God. That's great. That's high Christology right there, and that is wonderful stuff, and we love that. And part of the reason we love that is because it makes us right. It makes us right, because if Jesus is backed by God and we follow Jesus, then we're doing the right thing, right? And that means that we follow Jesus because Jesus' authority is wrapped up in God's authority, and there is no higher authority than God. Congratulations, you have won every theological argument from now until the end of time. Except you haven't. And the reason that you haven't is because being a Christian is complicated. It's not as simple as being right and wrong. It's a complicated profession, being a Christian, and that is shown to us in our epistle reading from Corinthians today. Even if we're right, which we are, even if we're right, what we do with being right, that's the problem. And that's where we have to start being careful. And Paul is telling the church in Corinth this in our 1 Corinthians reading today. What we have is the issue with food sacrificed to idols, which in and of itself is super fascinating because we don't have anything like that today. We don't have temples to Zeus or Artemis or Demeter or whoever where they are sacrificing animals to these gods. We don't have to worry about that. But they did in Corinth. And what was happening was these temples, they would sacrifice these animals. They would dedicate it to Zeus, Hera, whatever. Pick a god, That's what they would do with these animals. But then they're left with a dead animal. And you're looking at it and you're like, oh, cow, who wants steak? So literally what they would start to do, they would host dinners and they would sell meat as this sort of strange, almost church fundraiser. We do bake sales, and we do that good because we're Presbyterians and we like to cook and bake and stuff. They didn't have that option, so they made extra money by selling this meat. And that's where the problem starts. It's not if you should eat the meat, because Paul says go for it, man. It's just a steak. It was sacrificed to Zeus. Okay, congratulations. We don't believe Zeus has any authority here. Zeus has no power in this world. We know, as Paul says, there is one God and there is one Lord. Paul says it doesn't matter if people think there are other gods. It doesn't matter if there are other gods. What matters is the fact that we serve the one true God, the Most High, the one above all people, all things. That's who we serve. And we know this. It's part of the reason we do what we do. You see, there's a reason that Paul started this section talking about knowledge and love and the strange interplay that they have with each other. Because even if you have knowledge, Paul says, but you don't have love, you're wrong. And Paul says this and starts with this, not because he knows that the people are right about eating the meat sacrificed to idols, but because he knows that other people aren't okay with it. So he starts talking about weak Christians, and we in modern context, we have different words for them. Sometimes we call them new believers or baby Christians or whatever weird name you want to give them. They're people who are not as strong in the faith as someone else. And Paul says, look at them. They have a problem with it. And part of the reason they don't have a problem with it is because maybe they're still learning. Maybe they just don't know. They need guidance. They need this. They need that. But they have an issue with it. Yes, Paul says, you have Christian freedom to do this thing. But should you? That's the question Paul asks the church. Yeah, you can do it, but should you? Because as Paul says, let me tell you what's going to happen if someone who's weak in the faith sees it. They're going to think something's wrong. They might think you're a hypocrite. They might think you're full of it. They might think that you don't know what you're talking about, that all of this stuff going on is hokum. And that would cause them to sin. That would cause them to fall away from God's grace. That would cause them all of these terrible things. And whose fault is it? And Paul says the blame for that would fall squarely on you for doing the thing in the first place. You know, there was a movie with Matthew Broderick, War Games, where it's all about World War III and nuclear war and all of this stuff. And the supercomputer who thought it was playing a game but had nuclear launch codes. I don't know, it was weird. But what happens is the ending of the movie is the fact that they realize the only way to win is not to play. The only way to avoid terrible, catastrophic nuclear destruction of the entire world is just not to do it. The only way to win is not to play. So the only way, the only play that these Christians have, in Paul's view, to keep these other people safe, just don't eat the meat. It's not that hard. You are supposed to be a good example. And yeah, you have every right in the world to do it, and it's probably a really good cut of beef. You probably make a nice stew out of it or whatever. But you're called to something higher than that. You are called to care for and to love for all people. You are called to be an example to people. And if someone has a problem with it, you just don't do it. You see, because there's lots of ways that we think about evangelism. There's lots of ways that we think about how we spread the message of Jesus Christ. And one of those, sometimes what we see on the news, what we see in popular culture, has to do with a lot of yelling. Now, when I know I'm right, and I want to tell someone I'm right, how do I do it? Do I need to yell and scream to prove my point? Do I just need to keep pointing at the paper and saying, look, it's right here, you can do that, you can see what's going on? How do you show someone that you're right? Sometimes you can't. No matter how hard you try, sometimes people will not believe you. So you just live your life. You see, here's the thing. We follow Jesus who has authority, but I'm constantly fascinated with what we choose to call ourselves. See, and the name that we have collectively taken up for ourselves is Christian. Literally Christ-like. Show me where Jesus yelled and screamed at people. Show me where Jesus told people all the times how wrong they were. Yeah, he told them they were wrong. He's like, no, you don't understand that. Let me show you how you're wrong. But it was always tempered with this love. It was always tempered with this grace. Because it's not just about being right. It's about loving people. I can remember when I was in seminary, I was training with somebody outside in the courtyard to be a hospice volunteer. And several other students who I knew, they came up and talked to me, and we just had a fine conversation. And they spoke to the person I was with as if they were just an old friend they hadn't seen in forever. And I remember her asking, she said, everyone is so nice here. Is that because they have to? Because it's a seminary? No, they don't have to. And they do it because they have the love of Jesus in their hearts. Well, they could have just ignored her. They could have ignored me. But they didn't. Because part of being right is sharing that love with other people. There wasn't no, hey, how are you doing? Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? Because if not, you're going to burn in hell for all eternity. No, it was just, hey, how's it going? Oh, what are you guys doing? Oh, that's so cool. You work for the hospice. That's awesome. And asking for more information, things like that. Because it's our actions that share the love of God too. It's not just our words. It's how we deliver those words to other people. Just because we're right doesn't mean that we can't still be wrong. Being a disciple of Jesus is indeed a complicated profession. But it's the only job we know. It's filled with love, it's filled with grace, it's filled with mercy, and that, friends, that's what we're supposed to be like. That's how we live our lives. When we say, love one another, it's not just to avoid arguments or this, that, or the other thing. It is because God loves us. So let us do the right thing in the right way and share the love of God by loving all people. Amen.